Hey guys, my name is Wildcard and welcome back to my channel. So this week in rugby, there's a couple news that we wanted to talk about. The first one is that the Rainbow Cup has denied South African teams entries to Europe, and vice versa. I guess teams won't be able to travel to South Africa for from Europe either, because South Africa is considered a red zone in the European, I guess, countries, and it's considered the South African variant is considered quite dangerous. And yeah, it's basically the South African teams weren't able to get visas to participate in the tournament. So the Rainbow Cup is a new tournament that's being introduced since South Africa left the Super Rugby competition in 2000 and I guess before the lockdown in 2020, and then that was moved to then they were talks for the teams to join the top four teams in South Africa. It's Pro 14 to join the Pro 14 league in Europe, and basically according to the BBC, the season last year, 2021 season, was cut short. They removed the semifinals and quarterfinals to have a quicker start for the new season for the new competition called the Rainbow Cup, which includes the South African teams. And this is basically, yeah, I guess they were probably expecting the pandemic to be lessened by this time of the in 2021. This is currently April 2021, 23rd of April 2021. They probably were expecting the pandemic to be much better, and at least with the vaccination rates, probably we're expecting to be very high. However, that is not to be the case. There is still very strict restrictions to South Africa, to the countries from what I've read, that places like Wales, Ireland, and especially Scotland are basically not allowing people in. It's just very difficult to get people in there. The teams talked about potentially having the games played in third countries, like in Middle East. So they were looking at potentially putting the teams in a different country, like in Europe somewhere, but the countries were not able to, we're not happy to grant them visas to host them, period. And then they were looking at locations in Middle East, but that was scrapped. And yeah, so basically now the tournament has been split in half. So there will be the Pro 14 half of the European half of the tournament, called the there's a northern tournament and there's a southern tournament, and basically South Africa will play its own teams in a home and away round robin, and the northern teams will play the current fixtures as it's been stated. But when the teams are playing the South African teams, will be changed to a bye week. So they will have a bye week when you play the South African teams that you originally scheduled. Otherwise, you play the games that's scheduled currently for your team. There could be changes coming up shortly, and then that's just, the very unfortunate. That's just pretty much the Rainbow Cup being back to basically, this is basically what Super Rugby Unleashed was doing. So the teams were playing each other, and Pro 14 was doing before during the pandemic. So it's still the case, but it's currently under the umbrella of the Rainbow Cup, and it's not going to be including the South African teams. So very, very, very unfortunate for all the fans that wanted to see some rugby played by the South African teams, and there was a lot of criticism for this. So they were talking about trying to there was sentiment from South Africa. I was looking at Gareth's channel, and he's a YouTube. I think he's a YouTuber in South Africa. And he's just like, basically, he's talking about the people really wanted to send the South African teams overseas and really get them to play, just, keep them in a bubble. But that was evidently not the case. They were not allowed to go, and the countries weren't willing to host them. So it's not like the teams didn't try to do that. Obviously, if you will make sense for the teams to do that, to go and, complete the competition, even living away from home for 3-4 months. And then there was another thing that apparently they were talking about. There was a lot of people wanting to see the Springboks play, so they were talking about getting the Springboks team playing the provinces, traveling around the country playing the provinces. And that is apparently really, really popular. Like, I'm personally really keen to see that, to see the Springbok actually play. The Lions tour is coming up pretty soon, so the Springbok hasn't played any international games in a year and a half, and it's quickly approaching 2 years. So they haven't played a game since the World Cup final, and that was in November in 2019. And so, yeah, it's quickly approaching 2 years with no play. So a team, even though the players are, active and playing domestic competition, the intensity of international rugby is not to be messed with. We've seen, like, England, their players were not able to play club rugby whilst they're not playing international rugby. So they were, when they came back this year, 2021 Six Nation, they would perform really poorly, especially in the earlier rounds where players look out of shape. And that could be the case for South Africa if they don't, start pulling things together. And, just having a training camp, it's not going to be enough to play any team, international team. You need to have, a proper game time for these players to be match fit, to build your match awareness, to get used to the the international match's intensity. And yeah, that's probably something South Africa really needs to look into very soon. And second news that we were gonna follow up from the Moana Pasifika team. So this team is going to be added into Super Rugby in 2022. It's Moana Pasifika team it's a team that's predominantly represents Tonga, Samoa, Fiji, so the Pacific Islanders. And then there are some details that's being leaked through the breakdown show from the New Zealand Rugby over the week. And the details are a little bit, like, there's a bit of debate going on about how this team is it's being operated. So the details are basically the teams would be based in Auckland. So the teams are not going to be basically not going to be in, like, Fiji or Tonga or Samoa, which I thought it's a bit weird, but it will make financial sense, because initially I thought if they were just to play their games in Fiji every week, then, like, outside of the broadcasting, like the ticket sales are not going to be worth enough money for Australia and New Zealand, for Super Rugby in general. You're not gonna generate a lot of ticket sales just based on the local population in, like, one of the islands, let's say, a week. It's just not gonna be enough. And so they're based in Auckland, and the games are gonna be played in Mount Smart Stadium. That's or Eden Park. Eden Park is where Blues play, so I mean, it could be a conflict there, so it's probably not likely gonna be there. Not likely gonna be Eden Park. So the rules are, the squads are going to have no more than 20% non-Pacific Islander eligible players. So what this means is 80% of the players must be representing either Tonga, Samoa, or Fiji. So if they represent Australia or New Zealand, 80% of the players base cannot be eligible, basically, for anyone else other than the Pacific Island nations. Or neutral. So if you represent Australia, like, Alan Alatoa's from Australia. He can't play for this team, but he can't be within the 80%. He can play, but he can't be within the 80%. His brother, what's his name? I can't remember his first name. His brother Alatoa, who plays for the Crusaders. So Alan Alatoa plays in the Brumbies. He can't be in the 80%. Whereas his brother, who plays for the Crusaders, if he gets selected, he will be in the 80%. So there's only 20% of players that you're allowed, that this team is allowed, that can potentially be available for New Zealand or any other country in that matter. And the players will be contracted to Moana Pasifika and not New Zealand Rugby. So that's the detail that came out. So there's been a lot of discussions and arguments about this. There was a lot of concerns about Auckland being the location for this team, because the Auckland Blues hasn't been doing well for a very, very, very long time, and their fan base is shrinking basically. And having another team within the proximity, and as far I think there was a stat I read, is in Auckland, I think 15% of the population, something like a quite large proportion of the population, are Pacific Islanders. So all those people probably are most likely going to support the new team instead of the Blues. So that's one concern, and it's just that it's going to hurt the Blues franchise. Interestingly, the Blues are actually 50% owned by New Zealand Rugby, unlike the other teams. I think I think the Chiefs might be, not the Chiefs, I think the Highlanders might also be owned by New Zealand Rugby, partially. But Blues are 50% owned by New Zealand Rugby, I'm guessing because of its financial issues. And so, yeah, it's a lot of people are really concerned about that. And also people are concerned about what happens. So people are concerned about this team potentially just becoming another funnel team for New Zealand Rugby. People will play, the sole purpose of people getting into this team to try to, make their way into New Zealand. But currently, you have to be contracted with New Zealand Rugby to be able to eligible for the All Blacks. So the 20% non-Pacific Islanders technically still cannot play for the All Blacks because they're not contracted to the New Zealand Rugby. And then there was on the other side of the spectrum, the Pacific Islanders, there were people people force the Moana Pasifika team is that, having this sort of restrictions, 20% non-Pacific Islanders, is really not that enough to allow the team to be very competitive in Super Rugby. And also, there was criticism where they were talking about there are a few players that could be potentially signed by this team. And New Zealand Rugby's gone ahead and locked it down, like Dan Coles they were talking about. There was a few other young players where they basically talked about how these players are probably going to be a good addition to a Pacific Islander team. It has very little value left for New Zealand Rugby. Not to say Dan Coles has very little value left, but to say that, this would be a bigger addition for Pacific Islanders than to keep them on the contract for New Zealand Rugby. And New Zealand Rugby just went ahead and signed these people on the contract to make them not allowed to, to not make them available for Pacific Islander. So that's a thing that is a problem. The availability of players is very limited for the team, just based on these rules. And then if they do get, the best of the best players for that 20%, it's still gonna be difficult to compete in Super Rugby. And the thing is, if you look at with the Western Force, for instance, they don't have a rule like this. They can buy anyone, they can get anyone if they can afford it to play for the team. They don't have a cap of 20% of international players, for instance. So it is. So the argument goes both ways. One way is that they don't want the team to just be a funnel team for Australia or, any other country. And another argument is that with these rules, it's really going to, prevent, what's the word? Stymie the development of the team as efficient as it could be. Anyway, that's pretty much the big news for this week for rugby. Thank you for watching this video, and I'll see you guys next time. Cheers.